Described.
All right, well, good morning. I'd like to call to order the West Haven Subcommittee of the MARB. This is a telephonic meeting only. However, we are fully complying with public notice and public access requirements as the meeting has been properly noticed and is available for participation through telephone. Just want to say thank you all for yeoman's work with our MARB municipalities. Obviously, I started this journey on the other side of the table, and just to appreciate the commitment from this team. And obviously, we are on a continued journey with the City of West Haven. Welcome to Mayor Rossi, and just hoping that everyone is doing well and that your families are safe and healthy. With that, the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from April 1st, 2020. In terms of making a motion, please do state your name and that you are making the motion, moving the motion, and if you are going to second, please state your name and say that you second. So with that, is there a motion for the approval of the minutes for April 1st, 2020?
This is Christine Shaw moving approval.
All right, so Ms. Shaw has moved the motion. Is there a second?
Bob White.
Very good. And Bob has seconded the motion. It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Excellent. Seeing none, we will do a quick vote by roll call, and over to you, Julian.
Secretary McCaw?
Yes.
Christine Shaw?
Yes.
Steve Felsigno?
Yes.
And Robert White?
Yes.
Okay. The minutes have been approved as provided. Next up on the agenda is the review, discussion, and possible action regarding the fiscal year 2021-2025 five-year plan. The city, as you know, has provided a draft of its updated five-year plan for the general fund. We had an opportunity to preliminarily review the fiscal 2021 budget. We all felt that it was particularly necessary not to take action on the fiscal 21 budget without seeing the relationship to the updated five-year plan. It should be noted that the plan has not yet been submitted to the City Council, as it's still a work in progress. We expect the city will continue to work on the five-year plan, but this draft document provides us with a general framework that the city is currently working within and provides the MARB an opportunity to provide direction and guidance. There is a brief cover memo accompanying the plan draft in the meeting materials, including an exhibit that itemizes the high-level assumptions in the plan and how they compare to the assumptions used in the previous plan. Obviously, the final plan must include other appropriated funds and a description of major initiatives. And before I turn it over to Julian and then the city to walk us through the five-year plan, I want to provide us with some opening remarks with respect to some context. Obviously, we are in the middle of a public health unprecedented emergency or pandemic. And as we know, that is having corresponding impact on our economy with an increase in unemployment, suspension of various industries that I hope will be short-lived. That being said, as OPM works with its economic consultants on the impact of COVID on our state economy and our associated revenues, obviously we do anticipate that there will be some negative fallout from a revenue perspective. When unemployment is on a rise, personal income taxes are at a low. When industries are closed, it impacts sales and use tax revenues. And when consumer confidence has been shaken, they're less likely to invest, and consumer spending will be down. And so we all have to acknowledge that municipalities, too, could feel some impact with, to the extent that property tax revenues have some modest impact in constituents' ability to pay. But I will say that as you hear from the state on April 30th, you will hear financial news that is pretty significant deficit. And so I have to urge that the good work that we're doing through this committee on bringing West Haven to a place of stability is even more important now in the face of what will be a large state shortfall as we go into the coming 2 fiscal years. So that's just a little bit of context for this conversation. The state is here to support West Haven continue to move forward, but I have to urge caution that the state itself will be experiencing some challenges as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Frond, and if you feel it's appropriate to have the town or the city walk us through their 5-year plan, please proceed accordingly. Thank you. Okay, Julian.
Sorry, I muted myself and then forgot that I had done that. So you missed the best part of my presentation. What I was saying is that as the secretary said, the material that was submitted is still in draft form. It's a work in progress. We have the tables that comprise the financial projections for the general fund out to FY25. The cover memo that accompanied the plan provides a very high-level overview, and then also lists out the major assumptions in the plan and how they have evolved over the what is now the 3 versions of the 5-year plan. And so I think I'll let the city speak to the plan itself. I'll just highlight where some of the more significant changes in the assumptions have changed over time, starting with the grand list assumptions. So as we get closer to that FY22, which will be the first year that we see the impacts of the FY20 reval, they're closing in on an estimated change reflecting the impacts of reval. But if you set aside reval, the underlying growth in the grand list that is projected in the 5-year plan has not changed a lot. There basically consists of 2 items, which is a factor for sort of year-to-year growth and redevelopment using a very conservative figure of 0.05% growth, and then layered on top of that some specific increases related to the Havens project and the return of the 2 school properties to the grand list as taxable properties. So as conservative as those figures are, I should say, the assumptions for grand list growth are even more conservative than what was in the original plan. So they've kind of backed off some of the numbers in the original plans. We've seen the changes in the mill rates. Those are laid out year by year in the handout. Other than that, there are not a huge number of changes in the assumptions. The police pension has been brought up to date to reflect the most recent valuation. The health insurance projections have been updated to reflect the transition to the partnership for active employees. Debt service has been updated. There is some question that I have and was included in a list of questions that were sent to the city previously about what all is included in the debt service, whether it's just existing debt plus the high school related debt, which is yet to be issued, or is there also additional bonding authorization contemplated in these projections for subsequent years' capital projects. And then the no change in the use of restructuring funds, that continues along the same planned annual allotments that were incorporated into the original plan. So the remaining use of restructuring funds are for FY21 at $4 million, same as the original plan. $2 million in FY22, also the same as the original plan, and then no use of restructuring funds after that. And then in terms of the contents of the plan itself, I'll defer to the finance director and the mayor to cover that.
Okay, good morning. So the content of the plan is the same layout that we used last year. It begins with the fiscal 21 budget that we have proposed, or the mayor has proposed to the city council. And from there, we go into 22 through 25. As Julian mentioned, the grand list projections, we're using a 2% reval factor for the grand list for the fiscal 22 revaluation project. We do have an assumption in there for the school sales coming back on the tax records in fiscal 22, as well as a reduction to the grand list because of due to demolition on the Haven project. The underlying growth due to normal renovations, improvements, etc. Julian did mention that it is a very modest 0.05. The past 4 years have averaged, I would say, roughly 0.8% to 1%. So I think 0.05 is extremely conservative. As we look at the details to the revenues, most of the line items were projected to grow at modest percentages. The majority of the revenue increase, of course, coming from a mill rate and taxation to fund the projects that are ongoing. All assumptions for funds coming from the state have been level loaded, so there is no projection of increases in there. Some of the other line items, for example, the ERS, the fire department share of the ERS, that is derived specifically from the dispatch center assumptions. So as those numbers change, they filter through the model. And we have some very modest increases in some of the other lines as well. One thing you will notice is that on the very last area, the other financing sources, there is a transfer from the sewer operating fund that drops off significantly as the clean water or the clean water debt being paid by the city on behalf of the sewer department falls off. So the monies being transferred to cover that are dropping at a consistent rate, or actually to the rate that's being funded. As we go through the assumptions around the individual departments, you'll see the line item details in there. There have been factors uploaded for payroll increases due to contractual requirements by union. So as those numbers were solidified, they were built into the model. Everything else is at a very modest, either a 2% inflation factor or based off of the prior 4 years of history. Board of Education, overall, we have held that at a 0.04% increase, funding from the city, relying on the Board of Education to step up as they have, as they've moved to the high deductible plan. They've seen some savings on their health care costs. We would expect those savings to continue. Julian did mention a question around the debt service, and there is provided in the detail, all right, so provided in the detail is a breakdown by line item of the debt service. We have taken the 5-year capital plan that is represented in the fiscal 21 budget by line item. We have layered that into the model using the interest factors and assumptions around depreciation timing as coordinated with bond counsel. So all of those capital projects are layered into this 5-year plan along with the associated increases in debt service related to them. One thing of note is, as you will see in the public safety area, which is the first page of the detail on the debt service project, the police pension does drop off in fiscal 23, and you can see the level of that drop off is fairly significant, and that's what's being used to fund the general fund balance to get it up to a 5% of annual operating spend. Healthcare costs were built based on actual employees active in the current Connecticut health plan, the partnership plan. We used the bills from March to set this up. So as you look at the pages by year, you can see a breakdown of the active employees and their types of coverage. Of the 315 active employees on the city side, there are 51 employees who are currently not availing themselves of the health care. So their spouses or significant others are using the health care from their employers. Those assumptions we did not change. So we did not assume that in fiscal 22, any of those 51 are going to change their minds and jump onto the Connecticut healthcare. Any new hires that are planned, either in the budget or in the document itself, we assume that those new hires are coming in at a family coverage, so we are assuming the maximum cost for them as a conservative base. We are using a 7% growth rate per annum on these healthcare costs. And I saw a document, I believe yesterday, was forwarded to me that was showing that for New Haven County, I believe the aggregate increase next year would be 5.8%. So conservative there as well with the growth rates. The retirees, post and pre-65 retirees, are built based off of current assumptions provided by Lockton on the Anthem coverage. Those are also increasing at a 7% rate per annum. And all of that, again, is broken down within the document you have by year. I feel that the details in this model are actually more comprehensive than we've had in the past. It allows for line item changes, especially to the debt service area if required. And I feel that what's coming in now is an estimated 1 mil increase in 22 and 23. However, one thing to note is the very last page of the document relates to new hires. This draft was assuming 3 detectives being hired for the police department, 2 of which were going to be in fiscal 22 and 1 in 23. We have since adjusted that timing to bring on 1 detective in each year. So that will reduce the cost in fiscal 22, and you can see that breakdown between the wages and the health care would be a reduction of close to $100,000 or a little over $100,000. Furthermore, the admin clerk in human resources that was built into this new hire plan at this point is being removed until we are on board with the outsourcing company that is going to be providing the payroll and human resources support, if we are able to provide the level of service to the city without an additional body, we will go that route. However, we reserve the right to add that additional body or bodies as we move forward and understand completely what the city's requirements and exposure are once the outsourcing company is in place and running. That is a high-level overview of what is being reviewed by the mayor and myself. As mentioned, we have not taken this to the city council yet. My personal feeling was to avoid the issues from last year. I would prefer to take to the council a document that has been pre-vetted by the subcommittee and by the MARB in whole, so that I don't have to go to the council, come back to the MARB, and then go back to the council again. I would rather smooth out that process. So with that, I will be quiet and answer whatever questions or concerns that you have.
Great, thank you very much, Frank. I will get started. First of all, can you please remind me in what year your next reval will occur?
Fiscal 22. So it's next year.
Fiscal 22. Okay, very good. And again, your grand list growth assumption?
2% due to the reval and 0.05% due to normal renovations and improvements.
Okay. And can you give me some historical perspective on what you have experienced for grand list growth historically?
Yes. In fiscal 18, the grand list grew by 0.77%. In fiscal 19, 0.04%. And fiscal 20, 1.02%. And fiscal 21, 1.08%.
So when you average that out over the past, well, if fiscal 22 was your last full reval, in what year that you just cited would the comparable be to the prior reval?
The prior reval
17?
in fiscal 17 was actually a reduction to the grand list.
It was?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And has your assessor or your department that takes in all of the building permits, have they provided you with any information that would support the grand list potentially growing at 2%? You know, give me a little background on what you're basing the 2% growth on. And secondly, what was your prior reval assumption, please?
I haven't seen any of the data yet. Speaking to Michael Milone, he feels that based on property sales that have been going on in the past couple of years, the valuation is slightly undervalued, so that would support an increase to the grand list. The prior assumption...
I'm here.
I'm sorry?
Right, I'm here, and I can speak to that.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
All right.
Melissa, if I could, one of the things this is Michael Milone, one of the things I was tasked with was to spend some time with the assessor and look at the sales ratios from the last 4 years. And what we had was two sales ratios that we could use from the last 2016. The sales ratio was 67.11%. The sales ratio from 2017 was 61.8%. She hasn't gotten the 2018 equalized net grand list yet. And as soon as we do, certainly we'll figure that into this equation. But what it demonstrates is that currently the values in West Haven are undervalued. So even if there were no grand list growth, based on the fact that the values are falling under the 70%, and in one case by almost 8%, that it also supports the assumption of a 2% change in the value of property, even with no growth. So that was basically my argument to Frank in support of his 2%. We'll be able to refine this even more when the assessor has the updated equalized net grand list, probably sometime later this month.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michael.
And Melissa, just to answer your other question, the original assumption around the grand list was 100 basis points higher. So the original assumption in the 5-year plan was a 3% growth.
Very good. Okay. Great. I have to ask a very straight-up question to the team, and that is, obviously, as I look at the mill rate changes here, and, I look back at the original plan, and obviously West Haven was, at that point, not yet approved for any funding from the state. I would say that it looks like there was a more aggressive approach to mill rate adjustments to bring the city towards balance. I'm looking back at, a document that shows, in fiscal 20, the town had committed to a mill rate increase of 1 mil, in 21, 2.01. We're now, obviously landed in fiscal 20 at 0.42, and we're at 0.8. And then as we go into fiscal 22, a 1 mil increase. To me, it begs the question as to if the city was willing to support the mill rates that were in that original plan to bring itself back to stability. Why is there appear to be a slowing down in that commitment? I mean, I have to say that in light of the overall economy, the sooner you can get the city to landing on its own 2 feet, the better off I think you'll be. And one approach is to say, well, we're just going to commit to the level of revenues that we said we were going to achieve to lessen the blow on the mill rate. And I think another approach is that, the city is committed to expeditiously being able to financially stand on its own 2 feet and have a sustainable model. So I guess I really want to hear what is the vision and philosophy of the leadership in terms of what has been structured here for MARB's comment when it comes to mill rate adjustments.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor.
I hope everybody is well. So far, knock wood, we're all well here, so that's, and we hope that keeps going.
We are, thank you.
That's the most important thing, believe me, out of all of this. The philosophy was that, once again, my understanding was when we talked about this, and we have talked about this, is that the revenue assumption, so in other words, we couldn't add like new revenues that weren't vetted and different things like that. However, real growth in the grand list is identified by our assessor along with a mill increase equaled what the revenue expectations were in the 5-year plan. I also want to add, too, at this point in time, for instance, I had brought before you the idea of increasing the conveyance tax, and we're still going to do that. It's just that, again, we cannot identify right now how much it would be, when it would begin. It's going to happen in FY21 sometime. So, again, we're not putting anything in that we can't identify at this point in time prior to the budget approval that it's going to be a certain amount and sustainable to our 5-year plan. So we are, again, going to still do that. Michael Mylone has done a little bit of research. We have to develop an economic development zone first. So it'll happen somewhere in FY21, but again, we're not including it in the 5-year plan or in our budget this year. So we are doing our best to keep it, going, but we also, when we look at our 5-year plan, we also have to think of, the fire departments, which it's not like most municipalities that have their fire department would be all calculated in here. It's not. So I know that certain members have, talked about, are we competitive and all of that. So once again, that's where we're at.
If I could add something to that, Melissa, this is Michael Mylone. Is it okay if I speak?
Very briefly, because I'd like to open it up to MARB members. I don't think the mayor answered my question, and my question is, are we developing a plan to revenues or a plan that where there's a commitment to expeditiously weaning yourself off of state support? That's ultimately my question. My observation of this plan is that it's whatever's needed to meet the original revenue assumption, and however long, if that means extending amount of time on state support, it seems as if the town is willing to do so. My comments on the record are that, the intention of the Municipal Accountability Review Board is to provide support as you expeditiously bring yourself back to solvency and balance, and I think that should be done as timely as possible, and that the extent to which there were commitments to move that along, that there should still be that level of commitment. Those are my records on those are my comments on the record. The state's ability to continue to support this slow process, knowing that there are other municipalities that are likely going to need support in the face of an economic downturn, is something that obviously weighs very heavily on my mind. So, unless the mayor has any other comments, Michael,
I do,
I'm
Michael.
going to open it up to committee comments.
Can I just comment back? No, that's not our intent. We originally was getting state funding, as you know. It's been cut pretty much every year, and we have been sustaining that. And believe me, if there is any way that we can, legitimately on the right track, get out of it early, we absolutely will. We are not looking to extend it beyond what originally was in the 5-year plan. We have not gone up on any of the amounts from the original 5-year plan. On the contrary, we have gone down pretty much every single year by substantial amounts. So no, we want to stand alone, and we want to move on, and I want to say that I believe Frank's in agreement with me on that. We are not looking to extend this in any way, shape, and form. We are looking for new sources of revenue above and beyond, like tax increases, and one is the conveyance tax increase and other initiatives that Michael Malone and I are working on together with different user fees and different ways of sustaining alternate revenue, not necessarily tax increases. Thank you.
I'd like to open it up. Thank you, Mayor. MARB subcommittee members, I want to open it up for your discussion and comment. I'll hold my other questions till after you've had a chance to weigh in.
This is Bob White. Thank you. Two points. One is I think there may have been a miscommunication between the Secretary and Frank. My understanding is that the revaluation is this October. The effect will be in FY22, but the values will be set as of this October. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I can hear you. Say it again.
That's correct.
Sorry.
Okay. I don't know if that's what the Secretary heard, because I'd like to know a little bit about the expectation on valuations based on the current economic circumstance. I appreciate Michael's study of the sales ratio, and I take his point. And if it weren't that the world was upside down, I have a degree of confidence here. But where you value commercial properties on the income approach, I don't know how far back you go, but it's not going to be pretty. I don't know what the impact will be on comparable sales of residential property, given that likely there will be few sales. And I think you're comparing, the last reval was 2015, if I calculated correctly. So that was after the recession, and, it was certainly better. So that would be one question. Okay, that's one question. And if I can hold the floor for a second question, I'd appreciate it.
Michael, it's Lee Tiernan. Let me just provide a little bit of anecdotal information to start. People hear me? Yeah. So since COVID has started, we have a $200 million proposed development along the water that we call the Haven. I got a call from the developers of the Haven. All systems go. They're going forward. They closed the road down there. They put up fencing. They sent me the first bill concerning the Urban Action Grant. So nothing has stopped on that project. The City Council approved the sale of a library building last night. That's by a developer in the northern part of our city, multi-million-dollar development connected with where the UNH, the University of New Haven, is located. Another developer, not ceasing, not stopping, and they have a lot of retail space. Going forward, asking that, in fact, that we expedite and go forward. We have other real estate transactions, one with a business expanding, and our commercial people, the only thing that's holding up development right now is people can't come in to do title searches. So anecdotally, we're not finding any slowdown in that activity, which was not the case during the recession of '09.
That's encouraging. That's encouraging. Thank you. Thank you, Lee. Second question then, and I echo the Secretary's concern. As I calculated, you are proposing in this plan a apparently 2.8 mil increase between now and 2023, which is when you hit your bogey, and the first year without funds, without MARB funds. And and if my recollection is correct, FY22 is a mill, and if I forget, there's an election year in there somewhere, and I'm not sure what it is. And I totally understand what the mayor is saying in terms of looking at other revenue sources, but it just seems to me that, and I think you're being prudent not factoring them in, but it seems to me to have a mill rate increase that I personally do not think you will implement. And that's going to be for the MARB to decide. I don't think you're going to implement that. And the question is, are you going to be successful in these early stage other revenue sources? I don't know. What I heard from the Secretary is that you should not be shocked if state aid were reduced even more. And then the other thing is your tax collection rate of 98%. 98% is unchanged. And if you really think that after the deferral, everybody in the city is going to just send that check right in on time, I don't share that hope. So, can you talk to me a little bit about mill rates, collection rates? Because I'm not convinced.
And before you respond, just for the record, I am not confirming that there will be any municipal aid cuts. I will say that this is an environment where it will be unlikely to see increases, and certainly, our ability to continue to subsidize becomes more challenging. So it's always to your benefit to move your sustainability plan along as expeditiously as possible, because the times are going to get very, very tough here at the state level. So just to be clear, and I have to go on record because sometimes these little things show up in tweets in the media, and I want to make sure I am not misquoted. Not that was your intent, Bob. Thank you.
No, I'm sorry. That's right. It's just that that's my tea leaves. I don't think anything's going up, and God bless you if you can keep it steady.
That's spot on.
Go ahead. Anyway, if you can respond.
Yeah, I think the 98.4% collection rate. If I could see the future, I would be happier than you know what. But
right.
I have no idea what the future holds. Right? If that 98.4% is feasible, I would suspect that yes, there will probably be a drop in the short term. I don't currently have the mix of taxation that's coming from escrow versus people just paying on their own. If the escrow taxes are not being paid, then that's an even bigger picture, right? That means that people aren't even able to pay their mortgages, which is an entirely different conversation. As far as
And a very relevant one.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. As far as the mill rate increase for fiscal '22, I would say you are spot on. My limited experience here in the city is that next year or fiscal '22 will be another election year, which will make it very difficult for people to propose a tax increase. That being said, I think a 1 mil increase proposed as opposed to a 2 mil to get us whole by '22 is a little more palatable, because quite frankly, if there's a 2 mil increase with the unsure environment we're facing, I don't know if that 98% collection goes down to 95%. Right? With people just unable to pay a 2 mil increase when they're trying to cover their other bills. And I think we're fortunate here in the city that in '23 we are going to see that very large savings as the police pension plan falls off. And it's unfortunate that the prior administration, we increased the deficit by so much that they needed to bond for it. I think if the city could have gone without that and limped along, they may have been okay until '23 when they start seeing, that multi-million-dollar savings. But that being said, yes, I share your concerns, Mr. White. I'm a numbers guy, and I'm looking at this, and
Yep.
I have no idea what the future holds. And to reduce the collection rate, that's great, but that forces the mill rate up in an environment where we don't even know if the current mill rate is sustainable, because I haven't seen any
Yeah.
data on it yet.
Yeah,
This is Steve Paulson. No, I'm sorry. I thought you were finished. I apologize.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Steve.
I echo with what Mr. White said. As I look at these numbers, I have to tell you that I think I understand you're trying to put conservative numbers together, but I think you have to really look realistically at what's going on in the world. And the world is upside down. I don't see, if West Haven is holding the line on the values of their commercial properties, then I think you will be an anomaly in this environment. So I really think you have to look at these numbers a little bit more conservatively, and I'd rather see you err on the side of caution than assume any type of increase at all. I don't see how you can possibly even look at an increase right now over the next year and a half. And when you do your reval now, I can only see the revaluation of some of these properties not being as not being at the levels that they're at now. I think you have to. I know that no one can predict the future, but forward thinking tells you that you kind of figure out what's going to happen if you have 22 or 27 million people unemployed, and I would imagine that a good section of, or good cross section of the West Haven people are in somewhere in that in that number. So I think you have to really look at some of these things, and the pensions that you're already committed to. I think you have to really take a very, very hard look at the overall view of what you're doing. And I think your mill increase needs to be a little bit. I think you're going to see a devaluation in some of the properties, which means you're going to have to increase your mill rate anyway, just to come back to even to where you're at. So this is just my overview of what I see. I mean, I don't think you're any different than any other city or town in the state right now. Everybody's looking to see what they're going to be getting from the state of Connecticut, and I can't see it being more than what you're getting now. I can only see it being less. That's just my overview. I have no proof of that, but just what I read and what I see. So,
But even
that's just my overview. So,
Again, Lee Tiernan, if I may, well, I'm sorry, Madam Secretary.
No, this is Christine, but go ahead.
Oh, if I may, the evaluation is based on values as of last October. So technically, pursuant to the law, they shouldn't be affected. If you have a reval next October, it will be affected by this, but technically it shouldn't, although yes, you probably would get more tax appeals based on potential changes in the economy. It's hard to gauge. We didn't, I mean,
what I
there,
understood was that it was October of this year that affects 2022.
no, the
Correct in that?
But it's the values. The values are a year in arrears,
Right.
correct, Lee?
correct.
Yeah. So Lee raises a valid point. It's going to show up in the appeals process.
Okay.
And then they're going to have to, adjudicate that through their internal process, or if it gets expedited onto the court system. So that is a very valid distinction to make.
Wait. This is just a quick question, clarification question. Lee, the revaluation date is October 1, 2020. So the values as of that date will determine the new grand list, correct? Not 19, 20.
Right.
No,
Yes.
but
Yes.
Okay, and then you're going to have the appeals, but that'll go forward. But the values set are as of this October, which will take effect.
That's what
which will.
which should be down.
No.
Hold on, Lee. I need you to clarify this. The grand
Yes.
list is as of
Please.
October 1, 2020. That means it's reported out on that date. But Lee, that process has begun well over 6 months ago.
Correct.
So can you just clarify the time point and the values that you're taking? It's reported out on 2020, but it's looking at values from what period, sir?
So again, values going back the previous year.
Because it's a year-long process.
Right, I mean, some properties are already completed. Some properties were completed prior to this COVID problem beginning. I mean, it's not like they go property to property, they do inspections, some properties they can't get into. It's a fluid process. And like I say, we're not, in terms of our activity in town, we're not seeing the impact in valuations that people are suggesting. I think what people have to understand is, and this has been the experience in West Haven, there will be a delay. People don't accept decreases in value the way they accept increases in value. So that property values decline. I think you will be surprised. You shouldn't be surprised that property values, you might see this decline not next year, but 2 to 3 years from now, because no one wants to sell at a loss. Everybody's willing to sell as the prices accelerate and sell quickly, and that's why we have flipping. No one flips to sell a loss. So I don't think next year is really the year I'm concerned about, or the year I'm looking at for the dip. I'm more concerned about the following year, to be perfectly frank. But we'll have to get more data. The other thing that's happening here that hasn't happened in the prior 09 recession, which is the only recession we really have data on, is these backstops that they're putting. They've never put in this much money this fast, and whether that has any impact on the results and whether there is a true V as they're describing, we'll have to wait and see. But like I say, I think I'm not as concerned about next fiscal year. I am concerned about the following fiscal year.
I think you're right. I think you're right about that, Lee. And based on the economic consultants that we use here at the state, OPM uses IHS Consulting, OFA uses Moody's Analytics. On a positive note, the projections are, as you indicated, the V-shape, that this will be a more short-lived downturn, and when you look at some of the GDP and wages and salaries economic indicator data, it shows a 1-year blip, and then we start to rebound. So I think you're right. You're going to see the impact of values the year or two thereafter, but at the same time, if the economic data is accurate, after a year, folks will have regained jobs. Hopefully your tax collection rate stabilizes. You probably have a little bit of exposure in fiscal year 21. And so to me, that leads to a couple, maybe one question and one comment. And the first is, what have you assumed for contingency in the fiscal 21 budget in terms of just a budgeted line item? And secondly, do you think some of the conveyance type items becomes your second layer of contingency? And then the second thing I will say is that I would urge you to take a more substantial mill rate increase in fiscal 21, because I think there will be less of an appetite to do it in election year in fiscal 22. I would like to see the MARB number go down a little bit faster, and to continue to push you along towards sustainability. And I do think rounding out your mill rate to the mill is one way to do that, and take some pressure off of yourselves in an election year, because we all know that that's the political reality in which municipal governments operate in. So I'm going to turn it back over to you just to comment on contingency planning, and I'll throw out a couple of my other questions that I have in the area of tax collection. Just want to get a sense of what your uncollectibles look like. Have we offered amnesty programs? Have you evaluated whether there's an opportunity to do any tax deed sales? What else have you built in for efficiency savings? I mean, there's a couple more well-rounded type questions I want to hear from the city, and I need a reminder as to when your contracts open up once again.
So this is Frank. The contingency in the current year budget, the fiscal 21 budget, is $370,000. That number increases every year in the plan to, I believe, almost $500,000 by fiscal 25. I personally would like to see it higher than that. As far as the mill rate goes, I would have to yield to the mayor on that. However, I will say there were comments made regarding the revaluation and reducing the assumption on that. I would remind everyone on the call and anyone who's watching this from either venue, focusing only on the mill rate is inaccurate, right? So if the revaluation actually goes down, so the last revaluation, the impact was the mill rate went up by 265 basis points just to maintain the same taxation revenue. So even if the grand list goes down and the mill rate has to go up, the impact to the taxpayer is going to be neutral. So you can't look at one without the other. I think what we need to look at, in my own personal opinion, is to look at the taxation revenue that's coming in, right? So I wouldn't want to build a plan with minimal taxation revenue assumptions, assuming that we're going to find mystery revenues from somewhere else. But I'll let the mayor comment as to the mill rate in fiscal 21.
Great. So, Frank, you just confirmed that relying on conveyance tax revenues as an additional contingency is not something you recommend, and I support your position on that, which then leads to a $370,000 contingency in light of some of the updates on fund balance. Is an area that I recommend we reevaluate. And I agree with you, obviously, if the grand list declines and a mill rate increase has to be incorporated to adjust, it's still net neutral to the taxpayer. At the end of the day, I recommend that you you relook this mill rate and just acknowledge that, as Bob White has, I think, eloquently stated, there is going to be a lack of a desire to support the mill rate increase in an election year. And certainly I think it makes your work, as well as our work, a little bit more respectful of the time commitment to just acknowledge what the intentions are, and this would probably be the year to take a little bit more of an adjustment to acknowledge that you're going to need a little bit of a softer adjustment in an election year.
Okay, first, last year was an election year, and we did have a mill rate increase. Second, I've been following, of course, with CCM and all the information that they've been sending to the office. Most municipalities that have reported into CCM are either holding their taxes flat or reducing them slightly. We have done neither of those options because of the condition that we're in. I know that the council is still looking for ways to reduce the 0.8 mil increase. I don't know how receptive they are, and obviously, we need them on board to support anything higher. I understand what you're saying, again, about an election year, and I get it, and if we didn't have a mill increase last year, I would say, okay, that's the way it's been, and don't get me wrong, taxes in West Haven, before I got in, were basically flat and very rarely went up, and if they did, slightly. The other factor we have to look at, and as MARB is well aware of, is the financial condition of the 3 fire districts. Now, my understanding is the both independent fire districts, they are having their meetings, actually one of them is even having it early, if you will, and they are, the center is going up 1 mil, and West Shore is going up 3/4 of a mil, because I spoke to the chief in one department and one of the commissioners in the other. So once again, that impacts our taxpayers as well. So that's why we're looking for other revenue sources. But as I said, I am going to be prudent. I would not put any kind of revenue into any budget that we didn't believe was sustainable for the amounts we put in, because we don't need to go into deficit. I'm very, very cognizant of that. So once again, I know everybody's talking about higher. No one has said approximately how much higher you want to go, so at least I can present this, because there will be another budget meeting tonight to let the city council know, if they're not watching, what exactly the expectations of the review board are. And I think Lee wants to say something.
Yeah, just because you raised it, Madam Secretary, Lee Tiernan. The tax sale, I read one of the governor's executive orders. We had a tax sale teed up for the spring, and we put it on hold. It's ready to go. I anticipate a tax, as soon as that executive order is lifted, I anticipate a tax sale on what we would describe as our B list. If you have familiarity with our budget, we sell our tax liens for revenue. We consider that our A list, and then our B list goes wanting. It never gets bid on. So our proposal would be to take a substantial portion of the B list, put it on a tax sale. We've never done a tax sale, so it's hard to predict what it would do. But it's ready to go once I just need to hand it to the marshal, and it's ready to go. And we would tee that up to do, and that could generate revenue. The only other thing is we all need to be sensitive to the fact that, unfortunately, West Haven's in the bottom 20 on the wealth index in the state of Connecticut, and we always have to factor that in as to how we address how we're going to do things fiscally. But I appreciate the Secretary's comments, and look, this is a new, different thing. We're going to have to keep our eyes and ears open and adjust to changes in a rapid way, just like OPM has had to, I would imagine, over the last 8 weeks.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Attorney Tiernan. I support if there's A or B list moving forward, and I would recommend that you not rely on those revenues for your fixed general fund budget, but you use that as a means to build fund balance, and perhaps that helps to shore up a low $370,000 contingency. And Mayor, to your question, I would recommend that the mill increase be no less than 1 mil. Obviously, that's a decision for local leaders, but as far as the chair of the Municipal Accountability Review Board and understanding a little bit about local politics, I would recommend that you take it on the chin now and give a little pressure a little pressure relief next year. I know we have a couple of other items on the agenda, but I do want to understand where we are at for efficiency savings. Obviously, everything's not about mill rate increases and revenues, but to what extent we believe there are greater opportunities for efficiency savings. I'd like to hear from the town. In addition, I don't recall if on your efficiency savings plan, whether or not you have opportunities to merge or consolidate some city and Board of Ed functions to reduce some of the staffing. But I would like to have an update on the efficiency commitment for the city.
Well, I just want to talk about the Board of Ed and the city. We are already, with the payroll and the HR, we are going to be sharing positions. So one is risk manager, the other one is the benefits coordinator. All of these are in the FY21 budget. So we are going to do our best to work together on that venture, if you will. And so we are going to be sharing positions, and I want to say it's probably for the first time ever. I was on city council since 2005, and I don't ever remember sharing a position. So we are trying to do that, and we want to even expand it. Right now, we're looking at HR and payroll, but once we get done with that, we want to move on to other possible, the cooperations and partnerships that we can work with the Board of Ed to save taxpayers' money. Frank, do you have anything?
No, the majority of our savings came from the healthcare, and we're very, very pleased to see what got generated or what it will be generated by moving to the partnership plan. Of course, my only regret is that we didn't do it sooner. Other than that, we have some modest growths in some of the other areas. I know Michael and I have been looking at telephones, street lightings. We're seeing some of the savings from the negotiated rates with CCM. We continue to look at shared services, as you had mentioned, between Board of Ed and the city. So expectation is rather than go out and hire new people, we could try to figure out how we can get more accomplished with the individuals we have. I did, Madam Secretary, I just wanted to go back one more second back to the contingency. In addition to the unallocated 370, the current year budget does have an additional $425,000 built into it as the line item as a fund balance growth number. So that is currently built into the 21 budget, and that continues in future years as well.
Thanks.
Thank you, Frank. Any other discussion pertaining to the 5-year plan?
Yeah, Bob White.
Secretary, Christine Shaw. Sorry. So I appreciate the comments of my fellow committee members, particularly in light of how conservative or realistic the growth assumptions are. I too zeroed in on the flat assumptions for the collection rate, and my question is a fairly discrete one. What aspects of the revenue projections have been changed or modified in light of COVID?
We have not changed any assumptions at this point because I just don't have the data to go off of.
We can take that to follow.
So speaking of data, and granted, this is fairly new. This is a disruption that I don't think very many, I don't think anybody could have anticipated the magnitude of this. But there may be some corollaries with other downturns. Do you have any historical data on the impact on collection rates of prior downturns to gauge how elastic that revenue stream is?
That I do not have at my fingertips.
Do you want to talk?
I'm curious to know if that would be helpful here to kind of get a sense of what the potential dip is. Admittedly, this downturn, I think, is very different. The V factor, which we are hoping for, could materially change the duration of this downturn. But I'm very concerned that this plan does not take into account what is an economic impact of historic proportions. And while I appreciate there's the fund balance growth built in, the savings there, as well as the contingency, I just feel like this document has to be a bit more realistic in terms of reflecting what's in front of the city.
Yeah, if I may, through you, Secretary, to Ms. Shaw, Lee Tiernan, the only data we can really look at is we can look back at prior budgets in downturns. And I was looking at Mayor Bronin's budget that he presented yesterday, and I would say that they're, as to the worst case scenario, the worst case scenario would, I think that's accurate, would be about a 1% decline. That would be the worst case scenario. But again, it's a little bit of a guesstimate based on available data if you had a decline in revenue. So for us, that would be about $900,000, I guess.
Thank you. This is Bob White. Ken, just a couple questions on the revenues, on the expense side, and I encourage you to look at that, given the discussion on revenue. Number one is I was uncertain, and maybe the secretary can clarify this, but I was uncertain as to the commitment for efficiency savings of $1.2 million. Was that a one-year only commitment, or was that a rolling commitment each year? Because I didn't see any new efficiency savings for this year. Other questions I had, and you can sort of lump them together, is the superintendent was very candid when he said he was going to have trouble keeping salaries where they are after a number of years of zeros for teachers. And I noticed that the salary line for the B of E going out for the duration of the plan is flat. I'd like an explanation of whether he signed off on that, or that's just a hope. Another item would be, are there any COVID-related increases in expenses? I mean, laptops, I have no idea what they may be. Also, the ADEC, any changes to that based on economic assumptions? I know it would be 1 year over something, but I've got to believe that there's going to be a negative impact on the ADEC for hopefully a short period of time. And I guess the final thing is there any prospect of holding back on CapEx for a year or two just to build fund balance during this period of time? Because I really think, given the revenue discussion, that the play is going to be in the short term more on the expense side. But anyway, that's a bunch of questions. But you know, is there an efficiency saving goal for the year, and then a couple of the line items that I mentioned. Thank you.
All right. As to CapEx, I mean, our capital plan is as lean as could possibly be. We've deferred and delayed infrastructure to the point where we miss out on funding opportunities to replace school roofs where we'd get reimbursement because we delay capital spending where we'd have to chip in our share. So we're pretty much as lean as we can be on the capital side. On your prior to the other item you listed, we'd have to get back to, which was
The savings.
no, that phrase he used. Well, in any event, I'll go backwards and
ADEC,
Mr.
ADEC.
ADEC, we'll have to get back to you on ADEC. You have to understand, on the school spending, it isn't necessarily true that you couldn't have level funding. Remember, you're having declining enrollments. So declining enrollments could impact in that way that the school budget could remain where it is, notwithstanding having increases. Also, if you look at your aging workforce in education, there's going to be substantial retirements, and those folks are going to be replaced in terms of steps by people on the lower tier. So I don't know that assumption is correct, that you necessarily are going to require an increase on education. I don't know that flat funding on that isn't appropriate. But as the mayor indicated, we are now sharing and meeting with the Board of Ed on a regular basis to try to share duties and leverage other services. We work together already with payroll. They were involved in the ADP RFP from beginning to end. So I think we're going to know that information more quickly than we have in the past because of that collaboration. And I'm sorry, Member White, if I missed anything, let me know.
No, the only other the question we had to do with, is there an efficiency target?
Oh, I'm sorry.
21.
Yeah. Well, look, when you do efficiencies, you start and you create efficiencies, and then you get more efficient. If you think about in terms of behavior, if I create a fine for parking violations, and I get $2 million in the first year based on that fine, you have to assume that in the second year, people are going to change their behavior, and your fine revenue is probably going to go down. So as we get more efficient, you'd have to assume that it's going to be harder and harder to find those efficiencies. Notwithstanding, it is difficult to identify them in advance, put them in the budget, and then say, oh, we're going to meet that target. I mean, I can tell you that if this budget plan passes, I will have more resources to do bankruptcies and to do sale of assets, for example. Whether you call that an efficiency or not, I think it is an efficiency because we shouldn't have assets that don't produce something tangible for the city on the books. And even if we sold the property for $1, if you get it on the tax rolls, sometimes that can be an advantage. So it's not that nobody's looking at efficiencies, but we hit the big tier ones. I think where I'd be now is more, I could probably list 20 efficiencies, but they'd all be, dollar amounts that wouldn't be the big dollar amounts that you're going to see in the healthcare field. But if you want, I can provide the MARB board with projected efficiency projects. I don't know if I can put anticipated revenue dollars next to each one, though.
All right, so I'm going
Secretary.
Oh, was that you, Bob?
No, I just said that's a question for the Secretary.
Thank you. So a couple of things. As we round out our discussion, I think the general sense and feedback that's coming from the MARB members as surrounding you rethinking some of your assumptions, at least for 1 year, pertaining to COVID impact or economic assumptions. I think that West Haven should go back and just think really hard about the collection rate. And if we're going to hold the line on the collection rate, then we need to have confidence that the reserves are likely to be adequate in the event that maybe it's off by 0.5%. I would recommend you go back and take a look at pre-2008, 2009, and post-2008 and 2009 to give yourself a sense of what you might have seen in swings to inform you. And then maybe if you find that there's 0.25%, then Mr. Finance Director, calculate out what that 0.25% is, compare that to your fund balance with the adjustment that I've provided, plus what's in the fiscal 20 budget, assuming that lapses, plus what's in the fiscal 21 proposed, and let us then confirm that there would be adequate funds and what would then be remaining if you had to dip into those resources to cover those short-term revenue losses. Number two, I recommend we revisit the mill rate in fiscal 21, an acknowledgement that it will be harder in the following year, and also an acknowledgement that the idea here is to get you to sustainability as soon as possible. We don't have to say, well, this is good enough for the plan that was originally provided, but we had previously made a larger commitment in that year for a mill rate increase. I think we should be able to stand the ground at least with at least a 1 mil, and take some pressure off the second year. Number three, the pension ADAC that Mr. White raised is definitely something that should be revisited in terms of what assumption you use for fiscal 22. I think in the next time we get together, I'd like to hear what your investment returns have been for the current 12-month period, as well as maybe a look back over the past couple of years. It is likely that you will miss the mark in the coming year and have some spike in ADAC the next year, but obviously you're going to smooth that out over a time period. I'd ask your actuaries to inform you as to what that potential ADAC assumption adjustment might be. And maybe you'll say, look, let's assume we have this year's experience, which is negative returns likely. What would that do to my ADAC for the next 4 years? And you update that assumption because you're going to smooth that out over a 10 to 20 year period. I would ask that you update us on what you've done to look at some of the other revenue line items, licenses and permits, parking revenues, I thought, Frank, you had kind of done a line by line. Is there an opportunity to adjust some of those revenues to support your budget a little bit further? I think you should take a look at your attrition savings. Mr. Attorney Tiernan does raise some opportunities with respect to waves of retirements, et cetera. Are the attrition savings in line with what might ultimately happen? And last but not least, right-sizing your operations and making cuts. Unfortunately, I do think that is the climate that we're going to be in financially, and there should be some goal seek for you pertaining to expenditure savings, whether that's through efficiencies like, if Board of Ed and the city both have the same departments, is there an opportunity to share some resources? The two examples that the mayor provided, they happen to be adds to the budget, so there's like an efficiency in terms of productivity, and there's some areas that we all agree were not being addressed in the best way. But then we should also look at areas like, how do we do procurement? Are there opportunities in finance? We should continue to be looking at every single department. Are there opportunities as positions vacate to eliminate a function and to transfer those duties to someone else in a de minimis fashion? When you are a municipality and you can't make ends meet, unfortunately, those are the types of items you have to consider on a regular basis. I feel your pain. I'm doing it here for the state of Connecticut. I think that rounds out a lot of our feedback, and then obviously the extent to which amnesty programs or tax deed sales can help to bolster reserves. I don't recommend them for fixed costs, because obviously those are kind of like one-time revenues, if you will, in some respects. It's that I recommend be a part of your plan as well. MARB subcommittee members, did I miss any other feedback that we had provided to West Haven?
Madam Secretary, this is Michael. Can I add one thing to this education discussion to hopefully clarify something?
Certainly. Go right ahead, Mr. Malone.
Thank you. First of all, as part of the consolidation and coordination of the benefit functions with the city and the board, the superintendent has agreed to eliminate two positions, a payroll clerk and a benefits clerk. So he has cut down his staffing by 2 people. The other thing, I know there was a worry about whether or not education is adequately funded. I don't want to, throw a monkey wrench into this thing, but there's still the opportunity for the Board of Ed to transition to the state partnership plan. And the last analysis we did, which would have affected next fiscal year, reflected about a $1 million savings. Now, I know that doesn't include the IBNR, but it's still out there and it's money that could be saved. And the third thing is that every year the additional ECS grant money above what the city has flatlined as revenue goes to the board. I think next year they will receive somewhere between 1.6 and 1.7 in additional ECS revenue, which is not reflected anywhere in that budget. So it creates the impression that they are being flatlined when, in fact, they are continuing to get year after year increases in the ECS, but it's not reflected in that budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That's absolutely correct. I believe it's coming through as a separate alliance grant. So that's a very fair point.
That is correct.
Good.
For $1.6 million.
Good. Just one other thing for you, Madam Secretary, is what would be the guidance to the city on efficiency savings going forward? There was an offer to list some, but it's going to be hard to put a number. I just think there ought to be clarity, whatever you think is appropriate, on that, because I really think there's enough uncertainty about the revenues that I think one should look at opportunities within the expense side. So I guess the question is there in the MOA going to be a bogey for efficiency savings, either anecdotally or with numbers?
Mr. White, the answer is yes. The MOA will continue to make reference to efficiency savings, and through the board governance, we will continue to hold West Haven accountable. And sometimes, let's face it, that accountability, Mayor, gives you the leverage, if you will, to push for some of those things at your level. So we're a partner to you on that. But yes, the continuation for efficiency savings will always be a component of our annual agreement. And particularly the partnership plan, we will need to continue to evaluate that. I believe we are waiting for the final numbers to come from the comptroller's office. The town certainly has a fair amount of work to do on the HR side of the house, which might lead to productivity gains and strengthening some internal controls and maybe not like dollar and cent savings. But we will ask you to continue to pursue those efficiencies and continue to evaluate your operations and to be as lean as possible. Sometimes we feel like we're as lean as possible, and your financial reality might push you a little bit further. And Mr. White, I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. All right, very good. So with that, it does not appear that we would be taking action on the 5-year plan at this time. MARB subcommittee members, am I hearing you all correctly?
Yes, I guess given that I believe that there is some kind of deadline, or there may be multiple deadlines. One is fulfillment of the 20 MOA was June 30. I don't know when budgets have to pass, and I think we've been pretty clear that the budget for FY21, whatever deadline schedule that's on, has to coincide with the plan. I'd like to get in. If they don't have, this doesn't have to come right now, but certainly very soon. I'd like to know what the deadline is for MARB approvals, for council approvals, for resubmission of plans, because it sounds like a very short timetable.
Is right. So we will take that offline and communicate with the subcommittee and the board through email and work with the city on their timelines. It does appear that obviously the 5-year plan before us is draft, and I commend Frank and the mayor on their approach to seeking some feedback. You'll take it back, I imagine, to the town council, have some conversations, and then resubmit a final plan for our review. We did relax some of the deadlines through executive order. We'll summarize that for us in email and come up with a more definitive schedule. If we need to have a special meeting just to deal with a budget and a 5-year plan, I'm certainly amenable to that as well. With that, I believe we're going to move on to review, discussion, and possible action on the fiscal 2021 budget. Let me just remind the committee where we're at, and then we'll have some discussion. We did have our first review of the budget at the beginning of the month. This is another opportunity for the subcommittee to provide guidance to the city in advance of any council action. And we know that the city should be preparing a contingency plan for fiscal 21 as well, some of which we've discussed or touched upon in our conversations of the 5-year plan. So with that said, obviously some of the items that we just raised that are embedded in the plan are also tied to the fiscal 2021 budget. Therefore, I don't believe we're in the position to take action. But I do want to open it up in case there's any other discussion on fiscal 21.
And I think your list of guidance on the plan in many cases affects the 21 budget, and I think it's good to put that in. The only thing that wasn't on that list that I noticed is, are there any COVID-related expenses that are, might be anticipated? And we don't need to talk about that now, just
Sure.
as terms of guidance.
Great. Let me take that one really quick. It's a fast one. I did send out a communication to all municipalities in the state last week to summarize the list of federal stimulus funding that is available to support costs, whether it's on the Board of Ed side of the house or the city side of the house. Municipalities are sending a report back into OPM due May 1st. To identify any expenses they've incurred to date or that they project through the end of the fiscal year. It is my intention to make resources available for direct COVID-related expenses. They have to be expenses that were incurred and were not reflected in the original budget, and for which there's also documentation to support the expense and that it was COVID related. So by and large, I look forward to receiving West Haven's report, and I think it, depending on the total requests across the state, there should be some amount of reimbursement available to municipalities. I'm hearing from a lot of the municipalities that, you know, their costs have been relatively minimal. The state has tried to take on a lot of the expenses, so if we're dealing with shelters and things of that nature, to really be the one responsible for the direct payment. But that being said, municipalities and local leaders, where they felt that there are additional resources that were necessary for their communities, obviously have gone ahead and supported those expenses. We're looking to help support some of those costs at the local level. Great. Okay. So then we are going. Yes,
Madam
ma'am.
Secretary, one question. When I saw the Board of Ed's budget that was presented, we have a lot of questions that go behind the Board of Ed, and it's a very large number that, of course, almost 55% of this entire budget is Board of Ed, but we do not have the detail that falls underneath that, and I don't think the Board of Ed is on the phone today, but I do think it's prudent of us to receive similar detailed information as we have on the city side from the Board of Ed.
Excellent point. Mayor Rossi, will you see to it that the superintendent provides that information to the MARB?
Yes, I will contact him and explain that he has to provide it, but, you know, again, he doesn't work for me, but I'll be happy to send the message along.
Great, and we'll make a direct request as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, Kim?
No, Secretary.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to an update on the Human Resource Action Plan. There's a handout that has been provided. As we recall, the Human Resources Consulting Group report included 19 specific recommendations to the city to address deficiencies in the HR function. The city has moved forward on certain recommendations from the report, and we're looking forward to receiving an update today, as well as identifying others that remain to be completed. Let's see, we also have the requirement for the city to build out a detailed corrective action plan for implementing the recommendations in the report as a condition of the funding in the fiscal 20 MOA, which has not yet been signed, but we're making progress. Mayor Rossi did request that we reevaluate some of the dates associated with milestones, which we have done and sent back to her for her review. Mr. Milone has prepared the first draft of a structure for building out the HR corrective action plan, and is still formulating some of the additional detail regarding specific actions, steps, timelines, and responsible parties. We do have the first draft that's provided as a handout, and we're expecting a completed plan to OPM by May 15th. So with that, I will turn it over to the City of West Haven to walk us through the handouts. And Julian, if you have any introductory remarks on this item, please feel free to chime right in.
Oh, you have that.
Thank you. I don't have anything to add beyond the context that you just provided.
Excellent. Okay, so do we have Michael? Are you providing an update, sir? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm here, Madam Secretary, and I could try to do this very briefly. Just by way of background, I spoke with Kim and Julian last week, and what we came to realize is that this initiative, which started out as a pretty comprehensive human resources evaluation of the city and the Board of Ed, has grown significantly and become very complex. And they both advised me that really to get a handle on this and understand all of the collective actions and to try to coordinate them better, it would be a lot more efficient if this were built into some kind of a chart like we did with the state partnership plan when we did the transition, and I completely understood and agreed with it. And so what I did was, based on the information that I have, I put together this outline. I do want to make it clear that other than Julian and Kim, No one from the city has seen this yet because I finished it yesterday. So any references to dates or actions or anything like that still obviously need the review and the participation of the people involved. But I think that 80% of it is a very workable, at least start, and it allows us to get a sense of all of the things we're trying to do at one time and to better, I think, align them so that we don't work at cross purposes. One of the key things that I did want to point out is that we did basically take the Human Resources Consulting Group's outline, model, and recommendations and build it in here. But what's going to happen as this evolves is that this is going to get larger and larger, and I expect that many of these subgroups will become separate charts on their own. For example, item F, the Human Resource Administration section, I envision that will have a subset that will be added to this. This summary will stay pretty much as is, but there's going to have to be a lot more detail as these things build out and evolve. A couple of critical things to note. Human Resources Consulting Group finished their project on the overall review of the city and the Board of Ed, as you all know, because they made a presentation to MARB on each of those. And again, that's what we're using as our roadmap. But currently, they're working with the Board of Education because the Board of Education lost a payroll clerk and a benefits clerk, as I mentioned. And in keeping with, I think, this superintendent's spirit of consolidation and coordination, he didn't fill either of those two positions, awaiting the ultimate result of this comprehensive collective coordination between the city and the board. He has retained a Human Resources Consulting Group to help him at least get through the next 3 months to fill this void. And so that's a good thing because while they're there, they'll be able to start developing, the outline of what the shell of a new coordinated human resources function will look like with the city and the board. The other thing that I think Frank alluded to is the city went out for an RFP and decided to hire ADP for outsourcing the payroll and the benefits function. I don't know the status of that. I know it was going to the city council last night for approval, but I don't know if it was approved.
I can.
The bottom line is
I can weigh in on that. Yes, the ADP contract was approved for unanimously, and Lee will enter into negotiations. We're putting that on the fast track and want to get them in ASAP. And while I also have the line 2, I did read the updated MOA. I brought that to the city council. That was unanimously approved as well. I'm going to sign that and forward it to you, Secretary McCaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, and so what happens is ADP will start working with the city at some point in the near future, and we'll have a date for you by May 15th. But then correspondingly, we will have the Human Resources Consulting Group working with us as well on the administrative and operational side of the house. So what the challenge will be is to just make sure that we can complement the services of the two consultants so that we maximize their efficiency. A couple other quick things, and it was mentioned earlier, you could see it on this report. The mayor submitted a position for benefits administrator in next year's budget, as well as a position of a risk manager, both of which were two of the highest recommendations made by the consultants. And basically, I think this is pretty much self-explanatory. It'll get a lot more detail as we work through it. The other thing I did, and it might change because Julian and I had talked about this, rather than get really specific with dates, what we've done is we've basically broken out the milestones in terms of quarterly blocks of time. And you can see on the second page how we did that. We started with July going through September. We just thought it might be a little easier and a little more realistic to block things out in terms of quarterly achievements rather than working to specific dates, but that can change. So anyway, if if there's any suggestions or recommendations for changing this, we look forward to hearing from you folks. And in the meantime, for the next 2 weeks, I'll be working with the city staff so that we can start populating more and more of the information that isn't here right now. Because, again, this is due back to you by May 15th, and hopefully this is just the skeleton, and what you get in 2 weeks will look far different than what you see before you right now. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell, and thank you. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Opening it up for discussion.
Madam Secretary, I do if no members do.
All right. Kim, you have the floor.
Michael, I would make one suggestion is to combine some of these phases so that we're not at a 3-month phase. I do like the idea that we're phasing in, but I think that you can broaden it and make it more of a 6-month phase because 3 months go by very fast. So I would either take that into consideration and not go as tight because I'm just afraid on some of these deliverables you might not make the mark, and I would rather make sure that you're making the mark than missing the marks. So as you start to move forward with the plan, I would have some suggestions, and I do have some others that we can take offline as a follow-up. But I do appreciate Michael pulling all of this together for us after a quick conversation last week, and now that we can start to begin to see that there's a structure. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay. Look forward to seeing an update on these particular items. I was just curious and maybe this is a question for Kim or Julian or the city. The Human Resources Consulting Group. What is the cost for their engagement, and how is that being covered? I was wondering if that was through the administrative funds that we have.
Madam Secretary.
Sorry, go ahead.
The human resource function, you'll be happy to hear, is pursuant to our bidding requirements. It's kept under $10,000, so we didn't go out to bid with it, and it will be under $10,000. If we have to revisit whether they're going to have a more permanent function, we'll have to put that out to bid. We're absorbing that cost with what you heard, which is the unfilled positions at this time. But we're happy to look at whether or not OPM would reimburse such an activity.
I'm sure you would.
Yes.
Very good. And under the structure, are you literally evaluating whether you have the right structure, whether you have the right positions and skill sets, building the training, building the policies and procedures? Does that kind of describe, Michael, what we envision for HRCG support in that area?
Yes, absolutely. That's correct.
Okay.
And one other thing, I was remiss. I did want to make a note here that the school, as you can see at the bottom of page 1, the school superintendent has developed a response to his portion of this, which I sent up to Julian and Kim. So I do want to make that clear that he has been very responsive to this whole effort to bring this thing to collaboration.
Great. And then my second question was just on payroll management. Are we outsourcing payroll to ADP fully, or is this going to be, it looks like there's going to be a blend between staff on site versus contractual staff? Is there any clarification that you're prepared at this time, Michael, to talk about the ADP relationship, or is it a bit premature?
Well, I'll let Frank maybe expand on it, but the initial idea that I had here and the representation that I made is that the outsourcing for the payroll is expected to be pretty much the exclusive payroll. But as we realize, we are still going to need somebody to act as a clerk or an intervener between the staff and actually getting materials to ADP and interfacing with them, which is why I think I mentioned here somewhere, it says, however, there will still be a need for a payroll clerk or administrator on staff
Yeah, Madam Secretary, Lieutenant. Specifically, the ADP contract mandates a point person, so we'd always have to have somebody on staff. And obviously, they have to get the data. So we got to load the data.
Yes.
What we anticipate is, as I said to you a couple of subcommittee meetings ago, I think, we don't anticipate. Obviously, there might actually be a slight additional cost, although we're surprised by a lot of savings, including the way we do 1099s and W-2s, which we vendored out. But what we do anticipate is that the downloading of data is where we're going to find our efficiency. And then either those people are going to be doing other functions that are better for the city, or we are going to be, we anticipate hopefully reducing that function through attrition. That's what we would anticipate.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, we have an aging workforce, and it does appear that that would be the direction we can go in.
Thank you very much, Lee. I'd like for Kim and Julian to have some follow-up conversations with you on that offline.
Okay. I'll send Julian the contract today or tomorrow.
All right, very good. Any other discussion pertaining to the Human Resource Action Plan? Obviously, we'll have an update on around May 15th. Okay. Seeing none, we're moving on to our final item on the agenda, which is an update on the Corrective Action Plan pertaining to their audit findings as a condition of receiving fiscal 2020 restructuring funds. Kim, is there anything that you wanted to say to tee up this particular item before the city comments?
No, madam.
Okay. Mayor Rossi or team, would you like to speak to the Corrective Action Plan?
Yes, this is Frank. So I started working on it over the weekend. I had a conversation with Kim and Julian on Friday. I had anticipated completing it yesterday, but unfortunately I got sidetracked with requirements of the city. I have gone through. There were 15 items identified in the management letter. I'm waiting to hear back from the 5 relating to Board of Education. Others relating to Allentown, I have started to work on that, and I'm waiting to hear back from the auditor regarding 2 of the items, one being the tax department and one being purchasing. I'd like to understand what's behind the comment before I can put together any recommended actions. But I think 4 of the items that were written up were payroll related or were corrected after June 30th. So, for example, there was a write-up on the city clerk that everybody's using the same ID. When the new city clerk was elected in November, that was ended. So I'm trying to, rather than send you a document with holes in it, I'm trying to finish that up. I'd like to get that completed either today or tomorrow, and I can send it out to Kim and Julian.
Very good. We understand, Frank. Thank you for your work, and we're obviously very thankful that you're on the team supporting Mayor Rossi. So we understand. So it looks like there'll be a further update after our subcommittee meeting has concluded. Are there any questions, comments, or discussion pertaining to Frank's update? Okay. Is there any other business that anyone would like to raise or flag for a future meeting? Okay, seeing none. Well, I just want to say thank you to these outstanding subcommittee members for your dedication and commitment, and also to you, Mayor Rossi, for your continued work. Obviously, we are here to support you. And so our feedback is intended to be constructive and to ensure that West Haven is as strong as it can be. I wish all of you continued health, and OPM will follow up with some clarification on timelines that we'll be working towards. And with that, if there is someone who wants to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is that Mr. Felsigno?
It's Bob White.
Oh, yeah, okay, Bob, thank you. Is there a second?
Christine
Should
Shaw
I change the
seconds
tone of
that
my voice
motion.
and say second?
All right, Madam Co-Chair has seconded, and we don't need a vote to adjourn. Everyone take care and have a great day. Thank you all.
Bye.
Be well.